This episode is brought to you by our patrons on Patreon. If you'd like to support the MCP, go to bit.ly/morbidpatron. That's bit.ly/morbidpatron. Thank you. Humans are fascinated by gore and violence, but even more so, the mysterious and unsolved. Interest in these disturbing and unpleasant subjects is called morbid curiosity, and it has gripped hundreds of people throughout the ages. I am one of those people. My name is Hallie, and this is the Morbid Curiosity Podcast. On most occasions, when archaeologists find human remains, they must try to reconstruct the past from very meager evidence. The longer the remains have been in the ground, the less likely any evidence about that person and their life remains to be found. This is the case with most unearthed remains from the Late Stone Age, or Neolithic period, which occurred in Europe between 5,500 BCE and 2000 BCE. Most information we have about early humans from this period comes from burials, and not much is left but a few bones and possibly a few grave goods. These remains tell us about how the dead were treated, but not much about how they lived. However, one discovery changed everything we know about humans in the Neolithic, and it came in the form of a corpse, frozen in time. On September 19th, 1991, Helmut and Erika Simon were hiking in the Ötztal Alps on the border between Austria and Italy. It was warmer than usual, thanks to a hot wind blowing dust up from the Sahara, and the glaciers on the mountains were melting. As they hiked along the ridge, they passed a shallow rocky hollow and noticed something brown amongst the melting snow. As they got closer, they saw that it was a human head and shoulders lying face down in a puddle. The rest of the body was still concealed under the slushy snow. The two hikers took note of the location, and thinking it was another hiker who had died on the slopes of Mount Similaun, they reported it to the authorities once they returned to civilization. Over the next few days, many people visited the site, including famous mountain climber Reinhold Messer, who guessed that the body was not recent, but around 500 years old. A mountain ranger tried to remove the body with an ice axe, a drill, ski poles, and a stick, but had to give up due to bad weather on the mountain top. The body was stuck tight in the ice at 3,210 meters above sea level, or 10,500 feet, and its strange position, with the right arm partially under the body and partially sticking out to the left, and the left hand stuck beneath a large stone, made it even harder to remove. On the 22nd, the body was fully extracted from the ice using a jackhammer and was officially salvaged. This removal damaged parts of the lower left hip and thigh, but most of the body remained intact. Several objects were also salvaged and sent with the body to a medical examiner at the Institute of Forensic Medicine at the University of Innsbruck, Austria. One of these items was a stick that was used to hack away at the ice near the body and looked somewhat like a bow. As forensic technicians examined the frozen corpse, they began to wonder if it was older than previously thought and called in an expert from the Pre- and Proto-History Department, Dr. Konrad Spindler. As he examined the items that came with the corpse, Spindler estimated the corpse was around 4,000 years old. If this was true, the body was a very important find, as it was the first real insight into the early humans of the Alpine region. Physiological analysis and examination of the skeleton revealed that the corpse was male, around 46 years old and 159 centimeters tall in life, or 5'3". Much of the epidermis, or outer layer of skin, had decayed away, taking with it most of his hair and some of his fingernails. Because he was found in the Ötztal Alps near the Similaun mountain refuge, he became known as Ötzi, or the Similaun Iceman. Not long after the age of Ötzi was discovered, an excavation team went back to the spot where he was found and began a proper excavation that ran from August 4th to August 24th of 1992, despite the fact that the area had been badly trampled during the recovery effort. Soil samples, photographs, and a detailed map of the site were made and later published in a site report. The archaeologists found over 400 items, some merely scraps of cloth, but others included a quiver of arrows, a copper axe, flint knives, and a wooden backpack frame. All these items supported the theory that Ötzi was not modern at all. Despite the body being originally found in Italy, it stayed in Innsbruck for 6 years for analysis before being returned to Italy. Researchers ran several carbon-14 tests in order to discover the date that the corpse came to rest in the mountains. Carbon-14 dating, or radiocarbon dating, is a method of determining the date something organic died using the radioactive isotope of carbon called carbon-14. In summary, most organic matter contains carbon, and carbon contains one radioactive isotope, carbon-14. Plants take up atmospheric carbon dioxide through photosynthesis, thus taking in carbon-14 as well as part of that carbon. The plants are then eaten by animals, therefore every living thing is constantly exchanging carbon-14 with its environment throughout its life. Once it dies, this exchange stops. Carbon-14 then breaks down at a set rate over time, and its half-life, or the time it takes to reduce its radioactivity by half, is about 5,730 years. This predictable rate of decay makes it possible to tell the age of substances that contain carbon-14 by measuring how much carbon-14 exists in a specific material. As the level of carbon in the atmosphere has changed slightly over the last 5,000 years, thanks to human industrialization, calibration or adjustment for this higher level of carbon gives a more exact estimate of the date of death. In the case of Ötzi, a small amount of bone and tissue was taken from his body and analyzed in Zurich and Oxford. Both labs found that Ötzi was around 5,300 years old, meaning he came from around 3200 BCE. Ötzi was older than the bog bodies found in northern Europe and the mummies of the Egyptian pharaohs. This was an amazing find because Ötzi's body was, and still is, the only example of human remains with preserved soft tissue from this era in Europe. Analysis of his skeleton, soft tissues, DNA, hair, and the gear that was preserved along with him could provide a wealth of information that was never available before. The environment of the Alps during the Neolithic was similar to the environment now, but with colder weather. The last ice age ended around 10,000 years ago, but the Alps were still coated in ice sheets that had built up over the ice age. As this ice slowly receded, more land became inhabitable for vegetation and animals, including humans. Evidence of prehistoric human activity in this region goes back to around 10,000 years ago and suggests that these early humans were hunters and gatherers. Agriculture slowly evolved in the Middle East, and evidence points to agriculture reaching the Alps between 6,000 and 5,000 years ago, in the period known as the Late Neolithic, or Copper Age. This era was marked by a transition from stone tools to copper and bronze tools, just before the European Bronze Age began in about 2000 BCE. As time went on and the ice continued to melt, many high mountain valleys developed good grazing grounds above the timberline, where it was easy to feed domesticated goats and sheep. There are archaeological sites that date to the Neolithic in many of the valleys around the Alps, so we know humans lived there, but no complete human remains had ever been found until Ötzi. These archaeological sites which appear to be domestic in nature, have all been assigned to several categories of what is known as alpine culture. Alpine culture appears to have been centered on a practice called transhumance, in which every warm season the domesticated animals were driven up into the mountain pastures to graze and were brought back down into the valleys during the colder months. Prehistoric pile dwellings, or stilt houses, have been found in what were once marshy areas of the valleys, but are now lakes. These date to between 5000 and 500 BCE. The houses were built on stilts to prevent flooding in the summer months and are well preserved as they are currently waterlogged. The presence of non-local flint, shells, amber, gold, and pottery suggest that long-distance trade routes were already in place by this time. There's also some evidence of a dugout canoe and wooden wheels, showing technology was advancing. More evidence of these trade routes has recently been found in the Swiss Alps in a mountain pass called Schneidioch, around 500 kilometers or 310 miles away from where Ötzi was found. Items found in the pass include remnants of leather shoes and leggings, bows, arrow shafts, and arrowheads, which date to around 4000 BCE. This pass links Neolithic pile-dwelling sites in northern Switzerland to similar settlements that exist in the Rhone Valley from the same time period. Roman and medieval relics have also been found in Schneidioch Pass, indicating its long-term use as a way to cross the Alps. In January of 1998, Ötzi was moved to a new archaeological museum in Bolzano, Italy. He still resides there, preserved in a cold and moist environmental chamber that is visible to visitors. Much of the current research on Ötzi is conducted within the museum. In the years since his discovery, Ötzi's genome was completely sequenced and is currently open data, meaning anyone can see and use it for research. All the gear Ötzi carried with him, such as his bow, arrows, and axe, have also been analyzed and preserved at the museum. Ötzi's body and all his artifacts have been studied in detail and are still revealing things to researchers today about the life of this Neolithic European human. We've gained knowledge of his origins, habitat, activities, work habits, and the food he ate during his last few days of life, thanks to the study of his anatomy, the pathologies he suffered from, his stomach contents, his DNA, and the pollen and other materials found in and on his body. It was also discovered that Ötzi had some very interesting tattoos. In the years since the find, 7 people who were directly involved in the finding, recovery, and analysis of Ötzi have died. This has prompted claims of a curse associated with the Neolithic remains. However, as hundreds of people have interacted with Ötzi and not died mysteriously, there is little evidence to support this so-called curse. The real mystery is how Ötzi ended up dead in the High Alps, and researchers have proposed several interesting and gruesome theories, and as details of his life are revealed through analysis, even more theories are put forth to try to explain the evidence left behind. Early theories included exposure, in which Ötzi was thought to be a shepherd that got stuck in a storm and froze to death. Another was ritual sacrifice, similar to that of the Incan ice mummies. But most of these theories were set aside when 10 years after the body was found, CT scans revealed several injuries that indicated Ötzi was murdered. Before I get into the details of the Iceman's life and death, let's pause for a word from our sponsors. Our regular sponsor is Audible.com. Audible can provide you with interesting and engaging audiobooks. In fact, there are over 180,000 of them to choose from, which you can listen to on your iPhone, Android, Kindle, or other MP3 players. MCP listeners can get a free audiobook download and a 30-day free trial of Audible.com by going to www.audibletrial.com/MCP. You can also find this link on our Facebook page and website. If you sign up for the free trial, you get a free audiobook that is yours to keep, even if you cancel the service as soon as you finish downloading it. And the MCP gets the funding it needs to keep bringing morbid history to your ears. So go get your free audiobook on us. Lastly, if you like this podcast, why not sponsor the MCP yourself by becoming a patron on Patreon? Over 30,000 people download this podcast every month, but only around 60 people are supporting us on Patreon. For a mere $1 an episode, that's $2 a month, you can get ad-free episodes, bonus behind-the-scenes info, give your opinion by answering polls, get updates on previous episode topics, and see photos of my foster cats. For $3 an episode, you get monthly outtake reels. For $5, you get a monthly pub quiz, where I quiz my husband on past episodes. For $10, you get a detailed bibliography of all the sources I've used while researching each episode. And at $20 per episode, you get a bit of miscellaneous morbidity, a short essay on a random morbid topic every month. Last month, we looked at the medicines in Game of Thrones, and previously I've reviewed horror video games and famous morbid pieces of art. All of these rewards aside, your patronage supports the podcast and keeps new episodes coming. I can't keep doing this podcast without you, so go to bit.ly/morbidpatron, that's bit.ly/morbidpatron, to choose your rewards and support the MCP. You'll have my eternal gratitude. And now, back to the podcast. There were several injuries to Ötzi's body that indicated a violent death. While Ötzi was X-rayed soon after his discovery, more detailed computed tomography or CT scans weren't completed until around 10 years after. CT scans are sophisticated X-rays that can reveal anatomic details of internal organs that can't be seen in conventional X-rays. One of the injuries revealed by both physical examination and CT scan was a deep cut on Ötzi's right hand. This cut was discovered in 2003 and is located between the thumb and index finger. It stretches from the palm to the back of the hand and is 3.7 centimeters or 1.5 inches long. A tissue sample was taken from the cut and rehydrated to look at the histology or cells along the edge of the cut. These cells showed scabbed blood, and a chemical analysis revealed that the chemicals associated with healing skin were present, both of which indicate that the cut occurred a few days prior to Ötzi's death, as it had a small amount of time to heal. The most supportive evidence of a violent death befalling Ötzi is an arrowhead lodged beneath his scapula or shoulder blade. It appears as though the arrow entered through his back and that the shaft of the arrow was probably removed shortly after he died. If the arrowhead pierced Ötzi's subclavian artery, he would have died within hours due to blood loss. If it didn't pierce the artery, he might have lasted a few days. Many researchers believe the arrowhead did pierce the artery, and therefore this injury ultimately caused his death. Even with CT scans, however, it's hard to tell if the arrowhead did or didn't pierce the artery, as there is a hematoma, or an area of clotted blood, surrounding the wound, which is hard to interpret. The only way to tell for sure would be to remove the arrowhead, but this procedure carries a heavy risk of damage to the body, so it has not yet been attempted. Another theory suggests a blow to the head killed Ötzi. A hairline fracture in the front of the skull was revealed by CT scan early on, but only recently has the brain tissue also been examined. This tissue shows a traumatic lesion, which suggests the injury was quite serious. Recently, this injury has been put forth as the true cause of death, and theories on how it occurred include a fall or possibly a blow to the head by an assailant. In this theory, put forth by several researchers, including Eduard A. Garter-Weigel, the former head preservation officer for the Iceman, Ötzi was shot with an arrow, but not fatally. The assailant finished the job with the blow to the head, then turned the body onto its front to reclaim the arrow, bending the arm into the unusual position it was found in. Without further research, the mystery of Ötzi's death might never be solved, but we can learn more about his life through several other interesting pathologies found in his remains. These injuries are mostly related to wear and tear from repeated movements. Ötzi had arthritis in his neck and right hip. He had frostbite damage on his left little toe, and he had 5 broken ribs on his left side that had healed during his lifetime, long before his death. Markers in his DNA showed that he was prone to coronary heart disease, and an area of calcification exists in one of his arteries, showing that he was indeed in the early stages of heart disease. Ötzi's DNA also reveals the presence of Lyme disease, which in its later stages can cause chronic arthritis. However, we don't know if he was symptomatic of Lyme disease, as it affects each individual differently. Ötzi had 3 gallstones, which suggests his normal diet was rich in animal products. He also had whipworm, an intestinal parasite in his gut, which can cause abdominal pain and diarrhea. His surviving fingernails have Bowes lines, which are lines of arrested growth caused by major illness during the last few months of his life. Several fleas were also found on his clothes. Ötzi's teeth show periodontitis, tooth decay, and accident-related dental damage in the form of abrasions on the tooth enamel. His rear molars show the worst of the decay and periodontitis. This decay is likely due to a starchy diet and lack of a toothbrush. One of his front teeth is also discolored, likely due to some type of trauma, and one of his back molars is missing a cusp. Ötzi also has several interesting physical anomalies, which osteologists call non-metric traits, because they can't be measured except as present or absent, and are part of normal human variation. Ötzi had a gap between his front teeth, called a diastema. His lower lumbar vertebra was attached to his sacrum, or tailbone. This is called a transitional L5 vertebrae, and may or may not have affected him in life, but areas of arthritis near it may have caused him some pain. Further analysis of his DNA revealed Ötzi was lactose intolerant, had type O blood, brown eyes, and brown hair. An extremely interesting find was that Ötzi had over 50 tattoos on his body. Adorning the body with piercings and tattoos has become widespread in our time, and the reasons people get tattoos are many and varied, and sometimes very personal. There's evidence to support that the reasoning for tattoos was the same in antiquity as it is now, and Ötzi is the oldest tattooed human to be found in Europe. His tattoos are simple and consist of small black lines on several parts of his body and one cruciform shape near his right knee. These tattoos were created by making incisions in the skin and then rubbing ash or charcoal into that incision. The lines are found on his right ankle, the Achilles tendon area of both legs, and on both sides of his spine, on his lower back. It's possible some faded tattoos also exist around one of his wrists, but this could also be a stain from a leather archery armguard. Interestingly, thanks to CT scans and X-rays, we can see that the tattoos are mostly in locations where Ötzi suffered from chronic pain due to arthritis. This suggests that the tattoos are therapeutic in nature, possibly an early form of acupuncture. The fact that he has these tattoos, and they seem to have been applied over and over again, suggests that this was a fairly common treatment. Not all of the areas with arthritis have tattoos, however. It's possible these tattoos are on locations where Ötzi suffered from pain due to strained tendons and ligaments. For example, the knee has a tattoo on it, but no arthritis is present. It's possible there was damage to the soft tissue that is unseen on CT scans. Some of his belongings indicate that Ötzi might have been an archer, and if he shot while kneeling, this could cause strain on the soft tissues that may have caused him chronic pain and necessitated these therapeutic tattoos. Other things that were found on Ötzi's body include arsenic and copper residue in his hair. One researcher, H.M. Bolt, believes this could indicate that Ötzi was involved in the smelting of copper ore. This, of course, depends on if the copper and arsenic came from something Ötzi did in life, or was absorbed by his hair after 5,000 years spent with his head on rocks that were coated in copper-fixing bacteria. The contents of Ötzi's stomach have also provided insight into his last days. The stomach wasn't actually located until around 2006, as it had moved up into the space where the lungs are after he died. The food residue left in his stomach and intestines can reveal what he ate, while the pollen content can reveal information about the environment in which he ate that food. The food residues indicate a high-fat diet, with both domesticated and wild animal meat, as well as processed cereal grains. Fine ground bran of a type of primitive wheat known as einkorn wheat was found, so it was likely in the form of bread. Meat found in his stomach was identified as red deer and ibex, a type of wild mountain goat. This supports the theory that even though agriculture and animal husbandry had arisen in Neolithic Europe, humans were still dependent on game hunting for food. There were also bits of seed from wheat grains found in Ötzi's colon, and these caused quite a stir when they were first identified. Apparently, the word for plant seed and the word for semen are the same in German. Therefore, many translations of German articles about Ötzi became confused and stated that semen was found in his colon. This sparked theories that Ötzi was killed for being homosexual. The semen claims were refuted by many researchers who had tested the contents of Ötzi's colon. However, we cannot say whether Ötzi was homosexual or not, as archaeological evidence cannot reveal sexual orientation. The pollen ingested by Ötzi indicates that in his last 30 or so hours of life, he crossed through several habitats in the Ötztal Mountains, high above the timberline, a similar altitude to that in which he was found, and down in the valley, near warmth-loving trees. It's thought this large amount of travel could be due to having a meal in the mountains, coming down from the mountains, and then going back up. This supports one of the theories about his death, the disaster theory, which I'll get into in a moment. This pollen also tells us what time of year he likely died in, as certain trees release their pollen at certain times of year. Pollen from late spring or early summer is what was found in his colon. The things Ötzi carried with him also tell us about him, as well as the Neolithic culture he belonged to. Found near his body was a yew bow that was unfinished and unstrung, a set of wayfaring wood arrows, also unfinished except for 2 that had flint arrowheads attached to them. These 2 arrows were broken. Also found near Ötzi was a copper axe, the frame of a backpack, a fungus called birch polypore that was probably medicinal, birch bark baskets which may have contained the embers from a previous fire wrapped in leaves, a tinder kit, a sharpening tool, and fragments of a net. Ötzi also wore clothing made from the leather of several different animals and what appears to be a woven grass cloak. Because of the scatter of all these things around him, some researchers think Ötzi originally lay in a higher position, but was moved due to glacial ice flow, which occurs with the annual melting and refreezing of the snow. This could also explain his missing epidermis and his awkward body position. There are many theories as to what profession Ötzi was that required him to be up in the mountains. These theories include that he was a hunter, a shepherd, a flint trader, an outlaw, a shaman, and a warrior. Unfortunately, there is no solid basis for any of these theories. To this day, shepherds take their flocks from the valley up into the high pastures of the Ötztal Mountains in June, and then bring them back down in September. Ötzi's body was found near one of these traditional shepherding routes, so many early theories circulated around Ötzi being a shepherd who was caught in a storm and perished. However, nothing about Ötzi indicates he was a shepherd, as no wool or other domesticated animal material was found on him. This theory of accidental death was ultimately abandoned when the arrowhead was found in his scapula. One researcher, Tom Loy, stated in 2009 that Ötzi had the blood of 2 people other than himself on one of the arrow tips he carried and on his clothes. However, I haven't found corroborating evidence for this statement in my research. If you know of any published sources for this, let me know. Some researchers, mainly A. Vanzetti, think Ötzi was placed on a flat platform above his discovery position as part of a burial. He believes this explains why Ötzi had so many objects with him. Vanzetti observes that it would have been difficult to carry so many things up into the mountains, and that it makes sense for Ötzi to have had so many items if they were placed around him as grave goods. This could also account for the scatter of the objects. The unfinished arrows and bow could be ceremonial, which would also support a burial. A delayed mountain burial may also explain his excellent state of preservation, which is theorized to have occurred by first drying out and then being frozen. Vanzetti theorizes that it's possible Ötzi died down in the valley, dried out while his family waited for warmer weather, and was then brought up into the mountains and placed on the platform as a burial. While some scholars agree Ötzi was likely on the platform originally and then drifted down thanks to glacial melt, there's no real evidence to support the burial theory. Vanzetti and his colleagues used spatial analysis of all the objects found during the excavation of the discovery site. However, recovery of the items at the time was haphazard, so Vanzetti made some assumptions on where the objects were using photographs and personal recollections, which is an issue as photos and personal recollections aren't very accurate sources. After the revelation of the Arrowhead, most researchers agree that the majority of the evidence points to murder, the so-called disaster theory. Ötzi went down the mountain, got into a scuffle or accident in which he sustained the cut on his hand, then went back up into the mountains fully equipped and was attacked. It's also possible he was a raider, or perhaps a warrior or hunter, who was caught unawares. In 2017, a forensic investigator, Alexander Horn, of the Munich police, evaluated the so-called crime scene. With the pollen evidence to back him up, Horn believes Ötzi came down out of the mountains and got in some sort of fight, and was stabbed in the hand. Even so, he must have won, because he went back up into the mountains with an unfinished bow and a lot of gear, which a person wouldn't do if they were in a hurry and worried about people chasing after them. Based on the site of the wound and the angle of the arrowhead, Horn believes Ötzi was either shot from behind as he was leaning over, or shot from below from a great distance. Horn guesses this was done in retaliation for whatever transpired down in the valley. Ötzi was not robbed, seeing as he had several valuable weapons left next to him when he was found, so in Horn's opinion, the intent of the killer was just to kill. This is the theory that was explored by the 2017 film Der Mann aus dem Eis, or Iceman, which starred Jürgen Vogel as the Iceman. Several of these theories seem viable, but it's impossible to solve the mystery, as the crime scene is over 5,000 years old. Still, the amount of information gathered from this single discovery is vast compared to this yet-to-be-solved mystery. Information is still being revealed as new technologies are applied to this ancient cold case, which is why Ötzi the Iceman continues to spark our curiosity. The Morbid Curiosity podcast was produced by H. Lloyd. If you'd like to get in touch or suggest a morbid topic for me to talk about, you can tweet the show at Morbid Podcast or find us on Facebook and Instagram at Morbid Curiosity Podcast. If you like the show, please share us on social media, and please give us a rating on iTunes. Your shares and ratings help us reach new listeners and expand this wonderfully creepy community. Thank you to everyone who commented, suggested topics, shared MCP posts, liked or followed the MCP on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram, and gave us ratings on iTunes. People like Paula, Thomas, Bry, Trixie, RJ, Kime Cheeto, Sleepytime 6832, Kay Cummins, Rocketsgram, Nurse Tori IA, Riven 1013, and Jabberwock Rock. Jason, Bunny, Allison, Andrew, and Danielle all have my eternal gratitude for becoming patrons. Thank you so much. Because of you, the listeners, our creepy community is growing, especially on Facebook, so head over there to engage with other listeners, discuss episodes and news articles, and share your own creepy stories and cute pet pictures. The MCP is part of a wider creepy community known as the Belfry Podcast Network. Check out the other shows on the Belfry Network at www.thebelfry.rip. As I said before, if you really like the MCP, please consider becoming a patron on Patreon. You can also give one-time donations by going to our website, www.morbidcuriositypodcast.com, and clicking the donate button. On our website, you can also find links to all our social media and sponsors, and other ways to contact us. If you'd rather contact us by mail, this address is also listed on the website. Another way to help the show is by going to our Amazon wish list at bit.ly/morbidwishlist. On this list are items that will help us improve the podcast, improve our workspace, and some things that are just for fun. Any purchases from this list are greatly appreciated. We are eternally grateful for your support. My name is Hallie, and until next time, thanks for listening.